Leslie's last lesson. At Vimy Ridge, he fought for freedom. The next battle was to teach us. Written by Maja Buium and illustrations by Maja Buium. Kaboom! The ground shook and shook and shook. The last time was the loudest, and then there was silence. "Is that what it was like?" asked Maddie, her eyes shining with wonder. Maddie snuggled closer to Granddad as they watched the Canada Day fireworks from the hillside. "I suppose so," Granddad replied. He looked down at her and ruffled her red curls. "But louder and a lot scarier." "Then why did Leslie go?" "He went," Granddad whispered, "like all the other young men, to fight for a peaceful world." Leslie Miller was a farmer's son. He was born in 1889 in Scarborough, Ontario. He loved growing up on the farm. He loved watching the bees collect pollen and the birds build their nests. When Leslie grew up, he became a school teacher. He was happiest when he shared the miracles of nature with his students. In 1914, the Great War broke out. Teacher Miller became Private Miller, and he was sent overseas. Since he knew many languages, he soon got the job of listening to the Central Powers' radio messages and relaying their secrets to the Allies. Leslie Miller spent months near Vimy Ridge, France, preparing for what would become Canada's greatest battle. Everyone helped. The sappers prepared the land. They chopped down the oak trees that towered over the battlefield. Other soldiers were assigned to be machine gunners, riflemen, and grenade throwers. They practiced daily. The wood from the trees that the sappers cut down was used to build tunnels and trenches that stretched deep into enemy territory. Bombs were secretly planted below the enemy's trenches. The soldiers ate, slept, and hid from their enemies in the trenches. The sergeants taught the soldiers a secret strategy. It was called the creeping barrage. They practiced it day after day. At meetings, they shared their plans with the soldiers and listened to soldiers' suggestions. At night, in their Sopwith triplanes, Red, Mullock, and other airmen took to the skies to photograph the battlefield. All winter long, they prepared. When the big day came, soldiers on the ground and pilots in the air would work together. On April 9th, 1917, the battle began. It was a blustery, rainy, and snowy day. The planes were grounded. The foot soldiers were on their own. The Canadian soldiers captured most of Vimy Ridge by noon on the first day, and they finished the battle when they captured the Pimple 3 days later. Kaboom! After the last kaboom, there was silence. What Private Miller heard that day were not fireworks, but bombs. Then the dust settled, and the world began to reawaken. The battle was over. Canada had won. Quiet cries replaced the kabooms. In a daze, Private Miller stared at the destroyed landscape. He saw men and guns, fires and mud. Then Leslie spotted the branch of an oak tree lying in the mud. He reached down and gently picked off a few small acorns. He put them in his pocket. Now Grandad took a deep breath and hugged Maddie. He wondered if she could imagine what the gentle soldier must have seen that day. Trees crashed to the ground, explosives, not roots, pressed deeply into the earth. And when it was over, not one single oak tree was left standing at Vimy Ridge. "Why did Leslie pick up the acorns?" Maddie asked, as she and Grandad reached the car. "He was looking for something to remember the battle," Grandad replied softly. Nothing else was left. For a long time, Leslie Miller and the other soldiers continued to fight. Battle after battle brought them closer to the end of the war. Finally, it was time to pick up their musty backpacks and return home. The journey took months. By 1918, the gentle soldier was home. He needed to rest and recover. He waited a long, long time, but he did not heal. He could not return to teaching. It made him sad to know that he would never teach again. "If only," he would say, "if only I could teach just one last lesson." Leslie Miller stayed on his father's farm. Father gave son his own piece of land, and Leslie planted the little saplings there. He named his farm the Vimy Oaks. He planted pear trees and apple trees. He raised bees and collected honey. He nourished the saplings and he watched them grow. He sold fresh vegetables from his roadside stand. He made maple syrup in the old-fashioned way. He hired teenagers to drive the horses and plow the fields, and he invited newcomers from all corners of the globe to plant crops on his land. Leslie and his farm grew, and freedom grew, and broken hearts mended, and the world grew whole again. The saplings grew into mighty oak trees. Their branches spread over the woodlot and gave a home to the chipmunks and the songbirds of the forest. And the city grew around them. In time, Leslie Miller grew old, and the trees were forgotten. The stories were forgotten, and his farm was forgotten. And then he died. But Grandad remembered. Every year when they were small, Grandad would take the children to the old woodlot. As they ate freshly picked pears, he told them about his youth when he worked at the farm called the Vimy Oaks. "The last Vimy Ridge oak trees in the world are right here," Grandad would say. Autumn came. It was time to share Leslie's story with the world. Hand in hand, Maddie and Grandad walked to the grove where the crowd was gathering. There were reporters and friends and newcomers and residents. There were families and arborists and poets and artists. There were neighbors and politicians and students and gardeners. Maddie sat down under the tree and listened as Grandad talked to the crowd. There was so much to say and so little. A war, a soldier, some acorns, and a farm. And now there was a dream. We will all grow new saplings from these trees, Grandad told the crowd, and we will take them back to France. The forests that were destroyed will grow again. When the people left, Grandad went to sit down beside Maddie. Leslie Miller had one last lesson to teach, Maddie mused. The day he pocketed the handful of acorns was the first time all the Canadian soldiers fought together. All Leslie could see around him was death and destruction, yet he searched for a sign of hope for the future. He found it in the acorns. Yes, agreed Grandad. Leslie Miller taught us that even in the worst situations, we should search for something good. Maddie looked up at Grandad and continued. So by planting these oak saplings at Vimy Ridge, we are closing a circle. It's our way of saying that we learned Leslie's last lesson. Maddie reached down and gently picked up a small acorn from the forest floor. She placed it in her pocket. Story read by Sheri Alcordo. Story questions: historical fiction, sustainability, critical thinking, point of view, global and intergenerational connections, and activism are some of the things that this story focuses on. What do you know about or wonder about when you hear the Battle of Vimy Ridge? What surprised you about this story? Explain. Why is the Battle of Vimy Ridge still recognized and discussed as an important event in Canadian history over 100 years later? Is this a nature or a people story? Explain. Identify 2 character traits Leslie demonstrates in the story with evidence. Describe if you, another text character, or someone in the media or that you know has also demonstrated these character traits before. Describe ways you have or can be a responsible citizen and address local environmental issues to help your community. How did Canada's participation in World War I shape its relationships with other Allied countries? Why is it important to build positive relationships between countries? How do you think this could be done? What was the lesson you learned from Leslie? How can you apply it to your own life or classroom community? What are some criteria or strategies you would recommend to build peace and respectful relationships between different countries to alleviate wars? How could you apply this to your own